Chapter 12. Sunday afternoon. There might be a way to get more details, but Doreen spent the rest of the day frustrated and upset that she couldn't find anything relevant. Not on Meredith. Not on where the items had been disposed of, because surely somebody had a security camera pointed in that direction. But as far as she could see from walking around the neighborhood, nobody did, including herself. She had asked Mac too, just in case, but he'd responded with a no. So who knew how long that stuff had been lying there? She also looked for a news update on any bodies found at Steve's place, but she had no luck. So she decided to go on a walk to the property, only to be ceremoniously told she wasn't allowed on the land. She glared at the policemen, most of whom knew who she was, and said, "The least you could do is tell me if you found anything." They simply grinned at her and told her to ask Mac. She sighed as she turned around and studied the gardens as she walked past, trying to remain positive. She worked on Millicent's garden again on Friday. Thankfully, the weeds were under control, but they were looking at doing some transplanting. That brought Penny's garden to mind. Doreen could walk past it to see if Penny had her house for sale, and whether Penny was even still there. Was she out on bail? How did the gardens look now? With the animals at her heels, Doreen made her way toward Penny's and crossed over the creek, barely avoiding getting wet. The water had risen so much that she'd ended up getting soaked on Penny's side. Good thing she'd carried both Goliath and Thaddeus. Stopping on Penny's side, she said, "This is likely the last time, guys." Muggs barked, completely soaked and swimming like mad to get out on the steep bank. Worried, Doreen watched him until he landed on solid ground, shaking water like crazy. She screeched slightly and stepped out of the way, and then started to run around so Muggs would run too. They came up to Penny's place, but all the lights were out, the garage door was closed, and there was no sign of a vehicle. The front garden that Doreen had created looked great. The solar garden lamp was perfect too, and the plants had settled in and apparently were getting enough water from the irrigation. She gave a happy nod and carried on. She decided not to risk returning over the creek again. Especially not when Muggs obviously had a problem getting out. So she had to walk the long way. She came up at the small bridge that crossed to her place and walked over it. As she stopped and looked at it, she frowned. So who put this bridge here in the past? Who maintains it? Surely it's not the original one, considering there was such high water in the past that it took out the road bridges? Back over on her side, she was determined to do some gardening, so she could get this side of the yard done, and they could move forward with decking plans. She worked hard, and then finally crashed on her small veranda with a big glass of lemonade. She hadn't had anything else to eat since the spaghetti, yet even now she was doing okay, and it was 2 o'clock. She checked her phone, but there were no messages. That always made her suspicious. She grabbed her laptop and found a shady spot along the wall to work on more research. She had missed a couple emails on her phone that she hadn't been notified about. One was from Mac, confirming receipt of the IDs, while another one was from the Pioneer Society, saying they'd be delighted to take a look at what she had, and asking when she could show them the items from the Hope Chest boxes. A phone number was at the bottom of the email, so Doreen called them and asked if it was possible to bring the stuff today. They were delighted. Not wanting to push it off till later, she walked back into the house and brought out the boxes. She then unpacked the ones with all the lingerie, and decided that everything there could go in the display, alongside the love letters. She kept scans of the love letters, and then, just because she couldn't resist, she snapped photos of the clothing too and scanned in all the pictures as well. With that repacked and those 2 boxes ready to go, she still had 3 boxes full of dishes and 1 full of personal items, which she went through and decided they should go on display as well, depending on what the society wanted. And then she looked at the dishes again, laid them out, stacked them up, and took pictures of them to send to Scott. She wouldn't give them to the society until she figured out if she wanted them herself, or if Scott determined them to be a big-ticket item. And she really liked the simple pattern. With mugs at her heels, she loaded up the car with the 3 boxes and headed downtown. It took her a little bit to find the society, off the Richter Street area. When she finally found the little museum, she parked in the back, walked in, introduced herself, and then said she had the boxes in her car. She brought in the first box and showed it to them. It was all nightclothes and other clothing articles. Several of the volunteer board members were present, just concluding a meeting, and came down, delighted to see the handiwork and the personal items. Marjorie, the spokesperson, showed Doreen one empty glass display case. "Why don't you bring in the rest of the stuff so they could see what would fit here?" Doreen went back to the car. Muggs on a leash walked by her side. She made 2 trips and brought in both boxes. They had the first box already unpacked and had hung them up in the glass case. The nightgowns were upstaging the other clothes, all homemade with lovely details which had turned out beautifully. As for the love letters, some of them were opened and taped to the glass so people could read it. The society staff made sure they didn't block the view of anything else. Doreen felt a sense of rightness as she watched what the women were doing. "This is perfect," Doreen said in delight. A few personal items Marjorie had put on the shelves too. And still stuff remained in the boxes, but the women gave Doreen receipts for everything, as she gave them the history, as far as she knew it. And then, with a happy sigh, and their promise they'd have it all properly on display the next time she came back, Doreen headed home. With that one job done, she sent the photos of the dishes off to Scott, and then collapsed back down again outside. She still hadn't found out anything about this Meredith person. Nor had she eaten. Just then, Nan called her. "You should have come for lunch," she said. "It was delicious." "I still haven't eaten since breakfast," Doreen said. "I ate so much then." "One meal a day is one way to go through life," Nan said. "Some people even think it's the healthiest thing." "Do you know Meredith Pollux?" Doreen asked. Nan's voice lowered as she said, "Meredith. Meredith. Meredith." She paused. "Pollux, yes, but I don't think I know a Meredith." "She was a prostitute in town," Doreen said. "Well, it's not like I'd know her personally then, would I?" Nan said in exasperation. "You would if she happened to have been a child you knew or a teenager you knew or if you knew the family," Doreen said. "Just because she was a prostitute doesn't make her any less of a person." "Sure," Nan said. "As I said, I know the Pollux but not a Meredith." And then she gasped. "Do you mean Meredith, Jenny's daughter? Who then became Manny?" "I think so, yes." Doreen said. "I don't know who Jenny is either." "Who is she?" "A friend," Nan said. "I'll have to think about it." "Don't hang up," Doreen said with sudden intuition. Too late. Nan was gone. With the sun beating down on the back deck, Doreen took her laptop inside and started to research Manny Pollock. Apparently the Pollocks had been around Kelowna for a good 50+ years. Which meant Nan would know them. Or of them. That didn't mean she knew anyone in the family anymore, though. The family had a hardware store that had passed down to every generation. Doreen laughed at that. In the older days, everybody used to look down on those working in a trade. Yet they were the ones with steady businesses and steady money. And of course, that was why a lot of the wealthier people looked down on them. But Kelowna was built on pioneers and farmers and orchardists, working people. It was just that kind of area here. Doreen continued to do as much research as she could, but there wasn't any mention of a Manny Pollock either. Of the current Pollocks, at least 15 were listed in the phone book. She could hardly just sit here and dig down, wondering who and what. But then, there was the Historical Society of the Pioneer Families. 50 years ago probably didn't quite count, because Kelowna had been settled by the Europeans starting in the mid-1800s. Of course, the Aboriginal tribes roamed over this area some 6,000 years ago. She went looking for a Pollock's family tree. She should really sign up for a genealogy site. She didn't know if she could access other people's family trees or if she would just pay a fee to get hers. That was of no interest. But to have access to other people's trees, well, she did find a Pollock family tree online, and it gave her 3 generations. There was a Clementi and a Dorsey in the late 1800s, and they had 3 sons and 2 daughters, of which both daughters were deceased at a very young age. Doreen took a screenshot and printed it, so she could look at it a little more closely. 3 men had taken the male line down, and lots of additional kids were born per the sons, but it looked like one family had been wiped out, as everyone but the wife had died all in the same year. Doreen frowned at that one, and wondered if it was like a car accident or something. That left 2 sons and 2 families, of which there was a mix of males and females, but none of them had the name of Meredith. And it could have been in the next generation down, but it still didn't help her much. Then her phone rang again. Hating the interruption, she smiled when she saw who was calling. "Hey Nan. What's up?" "Jenny Pollock is here at Rosemore." Doreen straightened. Who is Jenny Pollock? As she looked at the tree in front of her, sure enough, Jenny was one of the son's daughters. "Manny's mother," Nan announced. "I spoke to her this morning." Immediately Doreen wrote that down. Interesting. And is Manny also Meredith? She was born Meredith and chose Manny later. Oh, Doreen said. Why? You would probably call her transgender, or whatever the newfangled term is. She switched from a Meredith to a Manny. Doreen sat back and wondered how that would have impacted her profession. Or was it because of her choices that she ended up on the streets? That placed her in an even more vulnerable sector of society. Did Jenny say anything about her daughter or son now? Jenny says she hasn't had any contact with her in over 10 years. The first she knew she was missing was when the police came knocking, Nan said with a little bit of excitement in her voice. Jenny would love to have answers before she dies. Will that be anytime soon? Doreen's mind went to the woman she had recently gotten a confession from, who passed away on that same day. Well, she's got stomach cancer, Nan said, so it's not like she'll live much longer. Ouch. I don't have any answers for her, so don't go telling her that I'm looking into this, Doreen warned. Too late, Nan said cheerfully. If you're asking me about Manny, believe me, you're looking into it. Doreen groaned. I need to know more about his life, like where Manny lived, what his lifestyle was, things like that. I don't know if she's willing to talk about that, she said. Jenny is very religious. Doreen sat back and thought about what a very religious woman would think of her daughter choosing to live as a man. Talk about family strife. And she never accepted Meredith's choice, did she? No, Meredith was supposed to get married, have children, and be a normal housewife, Nan said. Like all daughters back then. Did she ever marry? Yes, and she did have a son, Nan said. His parents divorced soon afterward. Did Meredith raise her son? For the first bit. Then he chose to go to his father's family back east. And he's not around here anymore? No, I doubt he has anything to do with Jenny or Manny, Nan said. According to Jenny, her grandson didn't have a lot to do with Meredith when she became Manny. I'm sorry for Manny, Doreen said softly. I can't imagine anything worse than to lose all your family while trying to find yourself. You also have to remember the timing, Nan said. There was a lot more judgment and a lot less acceptance back when Manny decided to make these changes, making him that much braver for doing so. Maybe, Nan said, but nobody has heard anything about him in a long time. I'll never remember to say he in regard to Manny. I think Manny would understand. You call him whatever you are comfortable with. So Jenny didn't contact the police about him being a missing person? No, the police called her because several of Manny's friends had noted that she had gone missing. That's very sad, Doreen said. Surely there was some communication between Jenny and Meredith, Manny? Doreen stumbled over the son-daughter aspect and decided Manny was hardly a child anymore. If she chose this life, well, he was an adult. No, the police said the friends hadn't heard anything from Manny and were asking questions. Jenny told the cops everything she could, but there wasn't much to say, and she hadn't had anything to do with Manny since Meredith became Manny. So, she can't help me with any details about the time he went missing, can she? I doubt it, Nan said. And as much as she wants answers, I think she's afraid she won't like them. Right, Doreen said, wincing. She already didn't like a lot about her child's life, so she may not like very much about Manny's death. Manny had a difficult lifestyle, one that, of course, Jenny didn't approve of. Manny did drugs. She was an alcoholic. And her friends were all in the same profession she was in, Nan said. So, it's understandable that prostitutes end up doing drugs and drinking. It is, indeed. So Jenny probably doesn't want to talk to me? Not really, Nan said. I can pump her for more information though, if you like. How about you don't pump her? Doreen said dryly. Maybe just ask her a few questions about who Manny hung around with, what she knew about any of Manny's friends, where he used to live, things like that. I'm on it, Nan said cheerfully, and she hung up.